Welcome back to the Major Journey podcast. Today's guest has over 6 years of experience in the legal cannabis industry and over 10 years in the medical and traditional market. He's passionate about telling stories of cannabis entrepreneurs and analyzing their success and business strategies. As the founder of High Design, a media platform that showcases the best of cannabis business strategy, culture, and innovation, his YouTube channel, LMC, educates companies and consumers on unique issues and opportunities in the cannabis industry. There was documentary style storytelling. He's covered some of the biggest in the business, such as Cookies, Jungle Boys. And if you ask me, this man is just getting started. So without further ado, Luc Carlin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, man. That was one of the probably the best intro I've ever had. So thank you.
I'm glad you feel that way, brother. I appreciate that. Well, hey, man, thank you so much. I know you've been running around a lot lately. Your content, everything that you've been putting out there has just been really, really on point lately. Kudos on some of the success of your recent interviews and content that I want to get into in a little bit. But just to kick it off, man, how did you even end up getting into this crazy industry and this crazy game to begin with? And how did that kind of bring you to where you are today, doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So growing up here in Seattle, Washington, always been involved with cannabis kind of since I was pretty young, like, just like high school, started, selling, and then I got my medical card and in high school. And then it was very unique timing for me because when I was so I the first year of my high school was 2011, 2012, and I was obviously in Washington State. So the state legalized cannabis in Colorado in 2013, right? And so I got to see the very end of like this old school medical market, kind of I call like the old school West Coast medical markets, and then I got to see the very beginning of cannabis legalization, recreational legalization. And it was this really weird, and I was in high school and I happened to have a medical card. So it's really, I got lucky really in a lot of ways, just being born in this time and place. And
Mhm.
I always tell people, you know, how thankful I am for that. And I'm very, I want to make the most out of it, but it's funny, like, I actually, I was voted in my high school yearbook, funny enough, like most herbal or whatever, like most like, which is funny. And then I remember going and I remember actually not, or I remember just because stigmas are still, I mean, like, I had aspirations to do a lot of different things. And, I didn't know if I was, everyone always asked me, are you gonna continue to do cannabis stuff like in college and so are, and I was like, you know what, I might, or I may not, like I honestly wanted to be, I wanted to do, I'm like a political junkie, so I love politics. I didn't, the more I learn about politics, the more I'm like, oh fuck no, I don't want to do politics. You have to be pretty much a sociopath for that. But no, but it's, I've had a lot of aspirations and I still do. But it's funny, like I'm a big believer in fate. And like fate just kept bringing me, like, just like with The Godfather, every time I try to leave, they pull me back in. And that really was the case here with cannabis because, I ended up, continuing on to sell cannabis in medical. Well, they actually destroyed medical in Washington State when they legalized, when the first market opened up. So they legalized in 2013 and then they opened up the market in 2015. And so that actually made it so that like there was this 2 year period of my high school career where like there was no enforcement. It was very, very Wild West. It was like really crazy time actually. Like I used to have a delivery service on Craigslist in high school.
Hmm.
And it was people would fly in from all over the country to either Denver or Seattle, right? Because those are the very first two cities, major cities that had quote unquote legal weed, right?
Right.
And it was a really interesting time, but I ended up continuing on, and then I ended up just having some stuff happen where I ended up losing a lot of money and just kind of just the stress over like because I really had hit like 8 years pretty much straight of like doing cannabis stuff and just hit just like a point where I was like, you know what, I need to just not be doing this anymore because the stress levels were just getting too high and it was affecting a lot of shit. But I was definitely looking for a purpose though, and it was funny because I was trying to find a job. Right, I was dead broke at this time. I had really nothing at this point, you know, and I ended up trying to find a job. I was going to college up north from Seattle in Bellingham, Washington, at Western Washington University. I was a history major, and I was like thinking about, I wasn't doing very good at school. Like I spent a lot of my time. I mean, I spent a lot of my time in the first 2 years of college just kind of selling a lot of weed and just, I used to have like a auto body shop. I ran a bunch of shit, right? And that all fucking crumbled, right? And then looking for a job, like kind of end of my sophomore year, kind of beginning my junior year. And the only job I could find in Bellingham at the time was this weed job. And I started
Mm.
working for this company called Space Weed. Very first company. So the very first company I ever worked for in recreational cannabis was this company called Space Weed, which happened. I just became a part owner in, funny enough, like literally like a month ago. So it's kind
Very
of come
cool.
full circle. But I started to, you know, look at, I started to do a lot of the marketing and sales for, and I worked in like every aspect of that business, but it was just really frustrating. The entire industry, until this day, it's pretty frustrating for the producer processor, because they don't allow for vertical integration in Washington State. They only allow for you to own retail or to own, cultivation and processing. They split those two. And so it's very frustrating for the producer processor. And I just saw a lot of problems. And so I ended up, through that, started to kind of do like, I self-taught myself to use a camera, and just went down this pathway of working with this company, Space Weed. And it started to just show me a lot of problems that I saw with the industry. And I honestly had, I was trying to just kind of find, I like this job at Space Weed, but it wasn't paying very well. And I also just, I wanted to always be doing something for myself continuously, because I realized, and I also realized that like content in general, I think it was like 2017 or something. I saw this Forbes article come out, and the cover of it, or not article, but this Forbes magazine, or I don't know which magazine it was, but it was the cover was Kylie Jenner, and it was the young, like she was being, quoted as like she was being like, touted as like the youngest self-made billionaire ever. Like she just beat
Mm.
out Mark.
Yeah.
And obviously she's not like self-made, let's be real. I mean, she's got whole family that's very famous that helped her. But what it showed me though was like, oh wow, we're in the era now of like influence. Like we're in the era of like media influence, and it can turn into potentially billions of dollars.
Hmm.
And so that combined with seeing a lot of problems and me just wanting to talk about, wanting to provide value for other cannabis entrepreneurs or other aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs, it led me down this pathway of starting to do a lot of YouTube like content for myself. And it used to be called Let's Talk Cannabis LMC. That was the original channel name. And LMC is just like my initials, right? Or it also stands for like Let's Make Creations, but it's really just my initials. And from there, like, I started to do, like news breakdowns, or I would analyze different like things that happen, certain business moves. And I would just kind of
Hmm.
talk off, I would use Zoom, right? And I would just review different articles, and I would just break them down and just really start talking, just getting a conversation going, and just highlighting different strategies I saw or different things that I saw. And that started at about the very beginning of the pandemic. So late 2019. Um, and then because it's the pandemic, right? Everyone's stuck at their house. So there's a lot more people watching, YouTube.
Right.
Plus I'm stuck in the house. Um, and so I ended up going off and working for a number of other companies as well after Space Weed, and I eventually come back around. But I always continuously kept doing my content, right? And I kept consistently doing it. And and I'm also kind of thankful because, without at this time too, I had just broken up with the girlfriend of mine, and like I was kind of at one of the probably lower times of my life, I would say, probably if not like the lowest part of my life, really, just in terms of just just trying to find purpose and just kind of feeling lost. And I just got lucky because I had this pathway of doing this cannabis content on YouTube as like my kind of thing that helped me kind of get out of the rut that I was
Yeah.
in. And it really was, and so I really just I went like just obsessively hardcore cannabis, content creation mode for, the first few years. And anyway, and then eventually, it led me to do the very first episode of High Design, which is, it's called Berner and the Cookies Cannabis Empire.
Mm.
Um, and that led me down the road of, okay, this is the kind of content people want, because I saw the data, I got the feedback, obviously, from just the results, the feed, the different the views. And I was like, okay, this is maybe the route I should take. And so, sorry, I know it's long-winded,
No, this is
but
good, man.
that's kind of the start of really my like real, the direction that I'm in right now. It's kind of started with the High Design series in Berner and the Cookies Cannabis Empire video, just doing really well. And then me kind of, pivoting to that type of content more so.
That's
So
cool, man. So let me ask you this. When you made that first video, did you kind of have in your mind like, okay, I'm gonna sit down with Berner one day and do an interview, have a conversation where we're actually sitting next to each other versus, me like analyzing the business, taking a deep dive into a brand and like sharing my perspective and my breakdown on it? Because that's some real 360 full circle level
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, it honestly, like, I've always been a big fan of Berner. I listened to him in high school. Like, I've been
What
a
was the
big
first album that you listened to
I
of
think the
his?
very first song, typical for like for most people, is they heard that 20 Joint song, or they heard like the Wax Room, which is like kind of the very
Mm,
first songs that are like very I mean, if you ask, I remember talking to him about that. He probably, it's like he's like, oh, bro, I know like those are his big songs, but he's got like 20 other albums or whatever it may be. But and I've listened to a lot more of his music now, since first getting introduced to him. But those are the very first two songs that really blew up. And I remember playing those in high school. I remember playing 20
yeah.
Joints in high school, like throughout my almost entire high school. Like I remember finding that song in like sophomore or junior year. And then, and then the cannabis industry starts to kind of unfold, and you start to hear this name Cookies. You start to see, hear Berner. And then, I mean, yeah, dude, I've been a big fan of him for a while. And when I did that first video and it did really well, I'd already, I definitely one of the like I'd already done multiple videos on him prior, because I did, I analyzed a lot of different business moves that he had made, just because I thought there was a lot of smart things he did, because he was really one of the very first people to understand like the importance of brand. And like,
Hmm.
I think that a lot of people have, I think he was one of the very, him and a number of other people were kind of the initial folks to really showcase the power of like the California brand that's now become so dominant and, spread all over the world now at this point.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to sit down. That was definitely a goal of mine. I felt initially like, I think I taught, I knew people around him. I definitely was one of my goals was to get a sit down interview with him for sure. And I remember talking to my buddy Lance, and this is a while ago, but he congratulated me because he was like, dude, like, you told me a while ago, like, yeah, you had a goal to do, to get to like to have, be able to talk to Berner, right? And you
Hmm.
accomplished that. And you said I was proud of you. So I mean, it definitely was cool full circle moment. I've had a few different full circle moments, honestly. Like the space weed thing is very full circle.
Hmm.
Everything is very full circle. But I think it also showcases like if you keep these goals in your mind and you're continuously working towards them, you gotta, work towards like obviously a much bigger goal, like a North Star. But if you know that that other kind of smaller goal is on the pathway there to your North Star, like, I think there's a good chance, it just depends really like how much you really want it, I guess, not to be super like ambiguous slash just like, I kind of hate when people are like very like generic with what they say when they say like, oh, like you don't really want it, but if you really want it, you'll work for it. But it's true. I mean, if you really want stuff, like you'll work towards it, and like manifesting stuff and having that mindset of like I'm gonna be able to do this one day, or I'm gonna do this, like it does help. So yeah, full circle moment for sure.
That's cool, man. I'm happy for you that you were able to experience that too, because not a lot of people do get to experience those full circle moments. And that's one hell of of a moment and experience to be able to soak up a lot of knowledge and a lot of information from. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you too. Like, I'm sure, and I'm just you've had, you've put out so much good quality content, and there's been so many different people that you could soak up information from. But just given how recent that interview was with Berner, I wanted to ask, like, was there one question or like one piece of information or like a piece of advice that you were kind of going into the interview with in mind and being like, man, I would love to get a piece of advice on blank, or I would love to ask him about blank. Did you have a moment like that, or like any kind of advice that
I
you were
had
happy to
so
get from that?
Yeah, I had so many honestly because I felt like this is what I felt like. I had done so much content on him and I've studied him so much that I felt like for me it felt like I was like in my mind I was like, dude, there's no one better on earth to interview, like to really do an interview with him than me, because I mean I've studied him more than pretty much anybody on the internet. Like I've put out more content on
Mhm.
him, so I felt like there were so many different things. It wasn't that, and the interview I did, the one I did with him recently, that's really like part one. Like there has to, like, I will say, like, Berner's gotten a lot smarter about his understanding of PR, understanding of like media for sure. I mean, because I've studied him over the years and I've seen some things that he's done that's probably not been the smartest, but he's really gotten much smarter about it. And I will say, like, that interview I did with him was really like part one of hopefully multiple, because I didn't get to ask him. There's a lot of stuff we didn't touch on that I knew about slash wanted to talk to him about. Um, but hopefully we're going to be able to do another one here soon and get to tackle some of those things that we didn't touch on. So
Cool.
yeah.
Um, Another thing, man. So I know, like, you're talking about, like, like that interview being like a part one. Where do you see high design, the LMC channel? Like, where do you see that going? Because I feel like there's a massive runway for you and the whole brand and the content and everything you're doing. Like,
Yeah, that's a great question. I see high design really as a brand that is all about showcasing the design of entrepreneurs and study, like, the high design like concept. Really, it came from me just wanting to learn how other folks were successful so that I could maybe one day take some parts of their design over here, take some from over here, put it into culminate that and put that into my own design one day to be successful with my own brand. So the high design brand really is about education and storytelling. It's about
mm,
studying stories to then help build your own design, right? And I realized that this formula of telling people stories and kind of doing some like business analysis as well, it was not like a cheat code, but it was like I realized, I was like, holy shit, this is like four birds, one stone almost. So there's like
mm,
three birds, one stone. So there's one reason why it's very beneficial is I get to like interview some of the best cannabis entrepreneurs in the world and I get to learn, right? Media is really, really good because you get to learn while you are creating content. Now the content also builds your
mhm.
own platforms, and you also, can eventually make money off that, right? You also get to network, right? I mean, I really like, I just turned 27, and like I know a lot of people in this industry now, to the point like I wouldn't have been able to get this far like my networking ability has always been really, really good. Even like when I was younger, I was very, very good. That's probably one of my number one skills. Um, and when I started to do media, I realized that this is the way that you can get access to folks that you usually could never get access to. That's playing, like I had, only like 3, 4 years of experience or whatever, and I get to talk to people that are like big time, that are like, decades of experience. Like,
Mhm.
only way I got in that room was because of media. So I realized the power of that. Now, the long term of this, of like where this is all going, is really I'm trying to build up a number of different media apparatuses or media infrastructures in different industries, but we're starting out with like cannabis, right? Because that's kind of what I was born into, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
And once I build that media apparatus in an industry like cannabis, like is the first one, I'm then going to then become, my goal is to become, an owner in a number of different companies, and then send those companies through my media apparatus, my infrastructure, and build the value over time through that, and then exit or whatever it may be. So, and then eventually, take that model, put that into another industry, another passion that I have, which there's other ones for sure. But that's kind of the grand view of it all. And then it's also really, but the whole pathway, the pathway to that is all paved with trying to help people. Like, right, it's
Mm-hmm.
paved with the want to help others first, because I know long term it's going to benefit me. Like, I want to help people tell their story. I want to help, promote this company. I want to learn from this company, but I want to help them. I want to help viewers learn just like I'm learning. I
Mm-hmm.
want to provide value first. And I know long term that value will be returned back into, back to me, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, man, I'm sure it's going to, especially I know you're talking about manifesting and putting things out there. So I love that. I'm a big believer in that as well. Having that said, just I don't know if you have like some project that you're working on or some kind of thing that you just want to put out there into the universe right here, right now. But do you have any kind of entrepreneurs in the cannabis space right now that you would love to just sit down with in a similar way that you've done in recent interviews and just interview and just have a conversation and just dive really deep into how they've designed their structures and entities?
Yeah. I've been asked this question before, and it's always like interesting because I've talked to a lot of people. There's definitely plenty of people out there I would love to like really sit down with and talk to. I've talked to a lot of them, but like, who's somebody I'm trying to really, really talk to? Who I really want to talk to? I want to talk to Josh Smith from Natura Sciences or Natura Life Sciences, because I have his number. I text him. I'm trying to hunt him down, honestly. To I've been trying to get an interview with him for a while, but he's he's someone that I've seen like over the last couple of years really, 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 like probably like top three, if not number one, like build. I've just seen I've just been observing, because I observe cannabis entrepreneurs kind of for a living, right? It's funny, like what he's done with. So let me grab what he's done with like the Sluggers brand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really impressive. I mean, it's something I actually want to do. Uh-oh, we got there we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
The Sluggers brand it's been really impressive what he's done, because it's first of all, the design, the whole concept is great. He it's obviously based off the baseball cards, and they're like the Keef covered, joints. And I love, because and a lot of these are like, for example, this is like cookies, right? This is a collab with cookies. They've got collabs with a bunch of people, and that's what we kind of want to do with Space Weed. But I've just seen what he's done, like how he's like built up these relationships with folks, and he's been, providing a lot of, he helped a lot of people out initially, and then he's now gotten that back in return, and he's done a lot of different collaborations for his brand Sluggers, and he's just
Right.
making a lot of like, really smart moves. Some of them are kind of aggressive, but I like it. Like, I like the aggressiveness that he's like, aggressive in the sense where he's just like moving just quickly, and it's a definitely a masterclass in
Mm.
real time. So he's definitely someone I would love to really just like sit down with and pick his brain and interview him, and yeah.
That's a good one, man. Are you familiar with Matt Morgan by any chance?
Yeah, Matthew Morgan, of course. I would love to talk to him for sure. He's someone I definitely would love to talk to. I've heard a lot about him over the years. Whether it's in my I do a lot of these interviews. Like when I do a documentary on someone, I do a lot of intake interviews. So I have like, I've got hours of like unreleased, like just phone interviews with people like
Mm.
Ivan, Jungle Boys, or other folks. And I remember Ivan, like when I first started covering the exotic story between Ivan and Berner. You know, I know Matthew Morgan is that third counterpart to that whole story. And I've heard some interesting stories about him. And I mean, I've been told slash I've seen, you know, or what I've seen, you know, just I kind of came into the legal industry a little bit after that whole time period, right?
Hmm.
I was still, you know, kind of in the streets, still traveling, kind of. It's just like, so I didn't even pay attention to all the stuff that was going on. But looking back on it, you know, with the exotics deal and everything, I mean, he's someone that I've seen do. I mean, he really hit it big, I think, in that very first wave in American, you know, legal cannabis. And I know he's probably I don't really know where he's at nowadays, but I know he's probably gonna make a comeback here soon. Or not to say he needs a comeback or anything, but just like I haven't really heard a lot about him lately, but I
Hmm.
know he's probably up to something really brilliant. So
Yeah, no, he's a super solid guy. I ran into him at BizCon, I think a couple of years ago. Super nice guy. Yeah, very easy to talk to. Really, really down to earth. I was following him for a while, kind of in the same way that you've been following a lot of operators. I forgot what it was, but something caught my eye just about like the way he was just moving and shaking and just, you know, moving very quickly. I think he was actually one of the main guys that helped build up Reef dispensaries in Vegas
yeah,
and
he
also
was.
that whole facility. Just super, super impressive stuff, what he's been able to do. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there too. I don't know if that's going to manifest into an interview or sit down with between you two, but selfishly, that's one that I would love to see. So I'm just putting that out there
Yeah,
for
I would
myself.
love to do that one too. I know he worked with Dan Blazarian and Ignite, which I'd be interested to talk to him about. I know there's
Yeah.
kind of must be I've heard some interesting stories about that.
Hmm.
You know, but like, you know, I definitely a brilliant dude that I would love. He's definitely one of those people I would love to sit down with. I really don't. I was told recent, like I was told like a couple years ago, last time I really he was doing something with CBD, I think, but I think he was just with Ignite, obviously. But I don't know. He made a killing in that very first run. I was told he made like a ridiculous amount of money. So I mean, he's pretty much. It seems like he's set for. I mean, who knows? I don't really know his actual circumstance, but it seems like he's like he made it, you know, in the very first round, you know, the very first wave of this all. And I'm sure he's gonna come back and do some dope stuff, or he probably is. I don't know, but yeah, I would love to sit down with him. That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure, man. Um, and so this is one thing that I was really excited to sit down and ask you about actually. So it's obvious you sat down with a magnitude of people. You've been able to chop it up and learn a lot from them. Has there been one thing in particular that you've learned from being in the cannabis industry and this whole entire ride in this space and in this community that you feel like you've learned exclusively because of the nature of the business versus, let's say, being in a more traditional, more mainstream industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say like this industry is really fascinating because and it's very invigorating or exhilarating more so
Mhm.
um because there's so much change happening. It's like, you know, you're playing chess, but like the pieces are the board is actually being moved underneath your pieces in a certain way.
Great
And so it
analogy.
adds a whole nother dimension to your play, right? To your gameplay. And things can change quickly. You know, you also need to, you know, really operate on a number of different levels. And because this industry has got one foot in the illegal market or the traditional market, one foot in the legal market, you have to tap dance kind of continuously moving in between those two a little bit. Not to say like you should, you know. I mean, honestly, dude, like the hinges have kind of been blown off the blown off the the vault door or whatever you want to say. Like there's gray market activity, and then there's the traditional, you know, then there's black market activity, and then there's white market activity. And it's really like playing within those three realms, but also doing it in a smart way that also is setting yourself up for the future. It's complex, dude. I mean, it's really going to be it's going to be so interesting to see how this all turns out in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And we're still really, and I'd say like, let's say there's 9 innings, like we're probably in inning number like 4, maybe 3, which for folks that have been in the industry, like they're like that hear that, they're like, what? Like one thing I'll say I'm really lucky about is I'm really happy that I'm like my age coming into this industry, because unfortunately there's a lot of folks that just that have either like left the industry or just, didn't make, that are burnt out, because there's so, I mean, it's just like I said, I'm so lucky to be born in this time, this place, and be the age that I am. Because there's folks that I know that are like in their 40s or 50s or 60s that like, man, they would give an arm, maybe not actually, but they give an arm and a leg to be my age in this time period, and have the energy that a 27-year-old would have, you know, because this is like the there's BC and there's AD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And legalization was year number zero, right? And now we're moving for the rest of the future moving forward. It's this. So I feel bad for folks that got burnt out, that just because it's just like tiring. I mean, it's really, it does burn you out for sure. And I commend all the folks that have been in this game 30 years, or 20, whatever, how many years, and they're still going just as hard. That's true discipline, and that's really impressive, And to go back to your question though, like the amount of change that's happening is really like, it's very rapid, and that's what makes this such a different industry. So things that I've learned from this industry have been, how do you always stay agile? How do you stay on your pivot? You can't pivot too quickly though, because you pivot too quickly, you don't know if it's going to work or not. Right. And that's the same thing with kind of, YouTube actually has been interesting, because YouTube's very similar in general. Like, you want to try a bunch of different things, but then you want to, you need to stick with stuff long enough to know if it's going to work or not, and then pivot and keep doing that until you figure out the right formula,
Mm-hmm.
to be successful in whatever you're trying to do. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of folks feel that way.
yeah.
But that's great advice right there. And then before we wrap up, man, I wanted to touch on space weed. So I know you had mentioned that you own a piece of that company now. Kudos on that.
Thank you,
Can you
brother.
just break down for us what exactly it is? Because I caught a glimpse of it in your interview and your sit down with Berner, but I would love to
Yeah,
just
I
hear
didn't
it
do a very good
directly
job
from you.
explaining it. Yeah, I didn't
Like,
do a
break it down for listeners, because this is super interesting and I never heard of it until that moment. So if you can break
yeah,
it down, that'd be amazing.
absolutely. So there is there's the process when you grow weed, right? You cultivate the cannabis, and whether it's indoor, outdoor, whatever, then you harvest it, right? You cut it down, and then right when you cut it down, it's the processing phase. Like, there's cultivation and there's processing, if you want to put
Mm-hmm.
it like that. And the very first part of, like, for flower product is, you need to start drying your cannabis, because your cannabis is wet, right? So the process of lyophilization, sublimation, um, right? People call it freeze drying as well, but it's really, you know, I like the word sublimation the best, because it really showcases, like, it truly is, like, if you look up online, look up what is sublimation, it'll explain it, pretty simply. But there's three different states of water, right? There's solid, right? So when you freeze it, it's solid. There's liquid, then there's gaseous. And so typically what most people do to get regular weed, right? Regular hang dry cannabis is, once they harvest it, they hang it, and then they have some fans going, and they leave that up there for about like 15 to 18 days, right? That's a typical
Mm-hmm.
hang period. What Space Weed does is, we have our technology, flash frozen cured, right? And what that does is, instead of going from liquid to over 15, 18 days with a hang dry that then
Mm-hmm.
comes in gaseous, that's a really long process. You actually go to the solid state. You start in the solid state. So you harvest your cannabis, and then you freeze it. So when it's frozen, the you can obviously preserve the weed, for quite some time. And then you use this process. called sublimation, and there's different technologies to be able to execute this, but we have all the patents domestically in the United States for lyophilization, sublimation of cannabis. And we've got tech right now, right? That you pretty much once it's frozen, you then put it into this machine, and it gets heated up a little, very, very slightly, very, 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 very slightly, and it rapidly skips the liquid phase of water, right? It goes from solid to gaseous, and then you suck out the gaseous through low pressure vacuum, so you don't lose any of the good stuff. And so what that allows you to do is that allows you to actually be able to harvest cannabis and be able to, if you wanted to, smoke it the next day instead of waiting 20 days to smoke it, right? With space weed, right? There's while you can do that, we like to wait a little. There's a curing press. There's a couple of different proprietary curing methods that we're implementing that are helping make the smoke the best possible smoke. But there's a lot of benefits to this process, right? There's terpene preservation, because you lose a lot of the terpenes, and cannabinoids get deteriorated because when water, there's two things that deteriorate. There's two major things that can deteriorate organic matter over time, and that's moisture, that's liquid, that's water, and that's oxygen. And when you're slowly getting, space weed is rapidly extracting moisture content, whereas a traditional hang dry is you're slowly extracting moisture content. And because it's slower, you're losing a lot of terpenes, you're losing a lot of different cannabinoids that get deteriorated over time. Now, and then there's also the fact is, like, if you smoke, like, imagine this, like, you ever like lit a fire with like wet wood?
Mm-hmm.
It gets kind of black. It's like hard to light.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't really work that well. It's also like, and then imagine that on your throat, like on like how, you know, like really one of the
True.
things really, really bad for your throat is smoking like something wet, right? It's putting, heat and water is really not a good thing to put on your throat. And so, one of the major benefits of space weed is that it's probably the smoothest, it is, in my opinion, the smoothest smoke you'll ever have, because there's not this excess water weight. There's not this excess water there that'll be burning your throat. And also, you're not paying for that excess water weight, right? Because folks, when so our ounces look like, I mean, they're huge, right? And it's this really interesting texture. This is going to become a whole nother SKU of flower, right? We're seeing other SKUs start to become into the fray now for flower. To always, like, there used to be just kind of the regular, either there's indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, and then it's a hang dry,
Mm-hmm.
and that's about the typical, like, the usual. Now it's going to get more complicated, and this is going to happen, whether folks like it or not, because this is really like, we're heading this new era of cannabis where now there's flavored terpenes, right? Which is a whole nother thing, right? That's going to be a whole nother SKU that's starting to happen that I'm not a big fan of, but it's going to happen no matter what. But it's now going to be like, okay, is this indoor, outdoor, greenhouse? Is this hang dry, flash frozen cured? Is this, you know what I'm saying? So there's going to be more processes adding. So this is going to be a whole nother SKU of cannabis coming here in the near future. And I think Space Weed's leading that way. But it's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of, influence to help, this is when people first handle space weed and they don't have any education alongside it, they don't have any information on it. Some people will just go directly to, like, just being, just hating on it, right? Which I get.
Mm-hmm.
Ignorance a lot of the time leads to hate, right? But when the folks are educated on it, they understand the benefits, like the terpene preservation, the smoother smoke, the you're not paying for the excess water weight. It also cleans your weed too, so you're not going to get any microbes. That's another huge component to this as well,
Interesting.
especially as we go on in the future when we talk about like liability and stuff. But like people smoking like mold or anything like this,
Mm.
and there's also a number of other, like, you don't need a grinder, and there's a bunch of other benefits too. But it's going to become a major SKU of cannabis flower. And like I said, space weed, I think, is leading the way. another like last thing I'll say on this is space weed, like this process also, we are we're doing a lot of R&D when it comes to certain genetics, because certain genetics perform better with certain processes. And so we're now creating a number of a whole, a whole um palette pretty much of different genetics that are going to be the best, that are going to showcase the technology in the best possible way, because certain genetics do better with certain processes, right? And so that's space weed really at the initial, and I've been a big believer in this technologies, the moment that I first really learned about it. And I've always, a dream of mine was to become, a part owner of this company. And it just so happened to be, that happened. So I'm a big believer in fate. There's been too many things that have happened to me in this whole process. Like the person, I brought in, I brought in a number of different people onto this team at Space Weed. One of the main partners is my friend named Fabian, who, happens to be an IP lawyer that is also a grower, brilliant dude. And then the founder, Eric Young, brilliant person as well. And it's just, there's so many things that like have come into place for this to happen, that it's destiny, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I would, and then kind of to transition to, I would love to ask, like really quickly ask you a question, like what, I've been hearing, obviously like you're one of those people that I've been, pretty much hearing. I mean, you're like, I would say top three best PR, best folks in the PR world of cannabis.
I appreciate that, man. Sincerely,
Yeah,
especially coming from you. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, dude. No, and I heard, I've been, like I said, I got recommended to you, but we had that initial intake session, and but I'm curious, what made you start to do content? And I think it's I'm really happy you're doing this show now, but I would love to like ask you about that.
Yeah, so I appreciate you asking that. And it's actually, and this was one of the cool things about hearing your whole process for the content that you did on the YouTube channel, right? So, um, and my wife always makes fun of me for this, but a lot of times whenever I meet new people, I have a tendency, and not in a negative way, but a lot of times like she'll look over at me and be like, "You're interviewing them again?" But I'm just so fascinated how people have so many different stories, and how this person may have, they may have success in this area of their life. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be financial, right? Um, but if I connect with somebody or meet somebody that has achieved success in one area or another, and it may be something that I personally want to do, or maybe I just have an affinity for that area, I just I'm such a junkie when it comes to soaking up that knowledge and just hearing about their story. And I think that's just what always kept me interested in PR to begin with. So I'm going to go there first, and then I'll circle back to the podcast. But getting to understand people's stories, I think that was one thing that really kept me intrigued about PR, and then wanting to put a positive spotlight on the people doing the right things for the right reasons. Um, and timing is a big part of that. So I think there's, timing. I don't believe in coincidences. I think kind of like how you said, like there's a lot of fate, there's a lot of destiny to a certain degree. Um, so as I was just doing the work, doing my thing, I was like, you know what? I could create content which could help serve as, kind of like you said, it could help build a personal brand, it could help market, it could help network. But at the same time, I feel like I've been able to have so many conversations, and like this is one of them, but I've been able to have so many conversations or just have a reason to reach out to people, where normally if you get, the LinkedIn DM that says, "Hey, you want to meet up for coffee," or like, "Hey, like I'll buy you dinner, right? You want to just sit down for 30 minutes for 45 minutes for an hour. I have a couple of questions to ask you." People are going to get fed up about that, especially people that are super successful and people that have a lot going on in their days, right? But if you reach out and you're just like, "Hey man, I've got a podcast. This is what we talk about. Would love to have you on as a guest. We could talk about what you're doing with your business, with, this and that. You down for it?" 9 times out of 10, people do not give bad responses to that. They are more than happy to sit down and chop it up and shed some light into their world. I feel like I've been able to get a PhD in so many different topics by just having a 30, 45 minute, 60-minute conversation with some of these folks. And to add to that, the network and the friendships and the relationships that have come from it, or you just can't put a price on that. And that's at least how I see it. So, I got into the podcasting thing not with a goal of like, having a show that blows up, like, like the Joe Rogan podcast or something like that. And a lot of times people ask me about that. They're like, well, you even asked me this too. You were like, hey man, are you going to be recording the video for this and all that? And I'm like, nah, I'm like, I just haven't gotten around to doing that part. We're doing audio only. And you were like, really? Why not? And I'm just not even thinking about that stuff. For me, it's just more so being able to just connect with that person and just soak up the information and find those little clues of success. Cause I believe that success always leaves clues. Like it's impossible. If you watch enough people, you'll start to see that there are certain common denominators along the way. And that's why every single time, I don't know if you've noticed this, but every time I have somebody on the show, I'll always ask them, what's one thing that this industry has taught you that a more traditional or more mainstream industry wouldn't have taught you? And just by asking that question, man, you would not believe how much I've been able to soak up and how much I've been able to learn. And people with different backgrounds, like somebody who maybe has an investment banking background, somebody who has a strictly agricultural background, like they give you such different answers, but they have so much depth and knowledge and insight and wisdom behind those answers. It's priceless. So that may have been a long answer to
No,
that
no,
question, but
no,
that's the truth, man.
that's great. No, I love it, dude. I love it, dude. Yeah, I agree. Dude. I think at the end of the day, like I would say it's definitely do video in the future, start to like work to that because you want to start to, the more views you get, the more guests you can get, and the more whatever it may be. But at the very least, like like I think it's dope because whether you're trying to shoot for the stars or you're just trying to just like but no matter what, even if you're just not trying to do be that big with it, right?
Hmm.
Able to learn, you're able to just have great conversations, and you're able to network, and that's priceless. I mean, it's literally like you said, it's you could get you could only get like a view, like one view on your, but it still would be worth it because you had that conversation with that person and you learn from that person, and like you
Totally.
know it's a very beneficial, dude. And you're like you said, the amount of responses you get compared to like asking someone to go, let me pick your brain, over dinner. People are way more down to do like, let me pick your brain over like a podcast that's potentially going to help build their personal brand, and
100%.
yeah, dude, absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question. That was definitely a good one. I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that on a
Well,
show.
I'm in media, so I understand. I understand when the moment you hit me up about the podcast and I knew this is new, I was like, oh, he gets it now. He understands. Yeah.
Yeah, and this was, I think, after I saw a couple clips of the Berner interview, and I've been a fan of his for a while now. Like I remember the first album that I got put onto, I think it was Urban Farmer, and that's like years ago. Like you said, 20 joints, and I was like, man, 20 joints. I was like, that was like new Berner for me. But
Yeah, he would love. Yeah, he would love to hear
yeah,
that. I'll have to send that clip. No, yeah, absolutely. He'd love it.
yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
man. Hey, look, I don't wanna take up too much of your time because I know you're busy, man. You got a lot going on. But before we wrap up, anything else you want to leave listeners with?
Um, no, I would say just like if you haven't seen any of my content before, just go to my YouTube channel. It's just type in LMC into YouTube. Also, keep your eyes open for space weed. Check me out on Instagram, LinkedIn, just Luc Carlin, Twitter, all that stuff. And yeah, guys, just I mean, I think I love what you said about there's clues to success, like just observing folks. Like I remember this baseball coach, his name is Dan Billy, and he always
Mhm.
used to tell me, it's like you can learn so you would always tell us like you can learn so much by just observing. Just observe these older ball players and just observe what they're doing. Just really study them when they're playing, and you'll pick up a lot of stuff. And so I've always kind of taken that mentality with me everywhere. And even when I couldn't get a hold of people and I wanted to do a video, I studied people. And eventually I studied them so well that I put out a whole video without even talking to them. And,
Mhm.
I then eventually would talk to them because they saw how well the video did. And they were like, dude, that's pretty accurate. Like you got almost like you got a lot of it. And it's like, just observe, like, so people like success leaves clues. I love that quote. That's a great quote. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, man, I wish I could remember where I heard it from or who I heard it from because I'd give them credit, but it definitely
Yeah.
wasn't me. So I just want to
No,
put
that's
that
your
disclaimer
quote.
out
No, yeah,
there.
yeah.
That's cool, man. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us, brother. This was one hell of an episode. I really appreciate it. Super excited to just follow on with the content and see who you've got teed up next for the next big interview.
Yeah, well, let's talk here soon, man. I would love to hop on a phone call here and talk more with you, man. I know we haven't talked in a little bit, but I love everything you're doing, and yeah, there's definitely some stuff here I'd love to talk to you about. So we'll hop on a phone call here this soon.
Totally, man. We'll make it happen. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Major Journey Podcast. We will catch you all next time.